Hey, Truth Seekers, welcome back. Zach here. Today I saw on CNN they were discussing our nation going to war with ISIS. Just like a decade ago, or more than a decade ago now, we were talking about going to war with terror and Al Qaeda, and now ISIS is this new offshoot of Al Qaeda. Let's watch this little media report. This is similar to what I saw earlier today, courtesy of CNN. If I can get it to pop up here.
ISIS, medieval in its brutality, shocks the world almost daily now with its executions of Muslims, Christians, Jews, including Americans. And Americans in the...
Notice how this CNN caption here even labels it as a war, as if we're already at war with ISIS. I mean, the media is constantly trying to shape and form our perceptions in our mind. The reason the average American's thought process is so controlled is because they've just learned to go off of what the television tells them.
The latest CNN ORC poll are now increasingly disapproving of how the president is handling the fight against ISIS. 58% now feel it is going poorly, up from 49% just in October. Even among Democrats, nearly half are not happy, despite the coalition response that's been lauded by the administration.
We're taking out their commander.
We're going to go back just a second, Truth Seeker, just a little numerology lesson here. 58 and 49. These numbers have the same numerology. Notice that 5 plus 8 equals 13. Take it a step further, 1 plus 3 for 13 equals 4. Just like 4 plus 9 equals 13, 1 plus 3 equals 4. They both have a numerology of 4. So in a sense, a numerologist would see both of these numbers, 58 and 49, as 4. Similar to 44. Okay.
Happy, despite the coalition response that's been lauded by the administration.
We're taking out their commanders, their fighters, and their leaders.
And maybe because most Americans feel it is actually not going well, now there's less opposition to the U.S. potentially sending ground troops to battle ISIS. Today, almost equally split on whether that would be a good idea. 47% of Americans would like to send troops.
Notice this is already the second time they've put up the percentage, 47%. They just love that one. Pay attention in the media, 47. You know how much we talk about it in this video blog. And here it is already twice in this report. And some more master numerology up on the screen, 55.
Troops, up from 43% in November. But that's something the president has been against from the beginning. Last week, asking Congress to approve a new authorization for military force more tailored to ISIS.
The United States should not get dragged back into another prolonged ground war in the Middle East. That's not in our national security.
If that was the truth and he meant it, amen. Unfortunately, it is not. Our government is all about doublespeak.
Interest, and it's not necessary for us to defeat ISIL. Local forces on the ground who know their country's best are best positioned to take the ground fight to ISIL, and that's what they're doing.
What the vast majority of Americans, nearly 8 in 10...
77%. The American meridian is the 77th meridian, which goes through Washington, D.C. The Pentagon is 77 feet tall in Washington, D.C. on the 77th meridian. It was Flight 77 that hit the Pentagon. George W. Bush gave Saddam Hussein 48 hours to step down on the 77th day of the year, March 18th. And look at what we have here, 21%. Was there another option? This doesn't even add up to 100. But, yeah, numbers we're seeing a lot lately.
And do agree on is that Congress should vote on what the long-term fight against ISIS will look like.
All right, so anyway, all this ISIS chatter and talk of going to war is taking me back to March, or I should say February and March of 2003 in the build-up to war with Iraq. And what I want to do right now is take the time to watch George W. Bush's speech giving Saddam 48 hours to step down or else war. And before we get into that, I also want to point out that Saddam Hussein has many 33 connections, including the town Tikrit, where he's born. Of course, Baghdad, Iraq, is right on the 33rd parallel. Iraq is the cradle of civilization, biblical times, a very significant piece of the world, and has much to do with 33. With that said, let's get into this speech. March 18th, 2003. Yours truly was 19 years old and could not believe his ears and eyeballs when he saw this.
My fellow citizens, events in Iraq have now reached the final days of decision. For more than a decade, the United States and other nations have pursued patient and honorable efforts to disarm the Iraqi regime without war. That regime pledged to reveal and destroy all its weapons of mass destruction as a condition for ending the Persian Gulf War in 1991. Since then, the world has engaged in 12 years of diplomacy. We have passed more than a dozen resolutions in the United Nations Security Council.
12 years. Remember, True Seeker, 12 represents complete to these numerologists. 12 inches in a foot, 12 months in a year. Lots of 12 focus lately.
We have sent hundreds of weapons inspectors to oversee the disarmament of Iraq. Our good faith has not been returned. The Iraqi regime has used diplomacy as a ploy to gain time and advantage. It has uniformly defied Security Council resolutions demanding full disarmament. Over the years, UN weapon inspectors have been threatened by Iraqi officials, electronically bugged, and systematically deceived. Peaceful efforts to disarm the Iraqi regime have failed again and again because we are not dealing with peaceful men. Intelligence gathered.
True Seeker, I want to take you back to when I was 19 years old. As a 19-year-old, when I heard these words, what I thought is, wait just a second. How can we, the United States, tell anybody in the world to disarm? We are the only nation to have dropped atomic weapons on a country, or at least so the story goes. Now with this research, I see that's all part of the conspiracy of 33, which seems a lot to do with hoaxes. Not always, but much of the time. So anyway, I was thinking, how can the United States say any country should have to disarm? You know, we portray ourselves as heroes and we trump ourselves up this way, but when you look at the facts, there's not really much to support this myth of the hero. Our nation was born out of a genocide, and we've been at war almost ever since with some part of the world. Sounds like a villain. Let's continue.
By this and other governments leaves no doubt that the Iraqi regime continues to possess and conceal some of the most lethal weapons ever devised. This regime has already used weapons of mass destruction against.
You guys, the night of this speech, the website buzzflash.com, which still exists, pumped out maybe 100 articles, just so much, all the research that was out there, saying that it was already disproven that Iraq had any weapons of mass destruction. That information was out the day he gave this speech. That means 2 days before we even started the war.
Against Iraq's neighbors and against Iraq's people. The regime has a history of reckless aggression in the Middle East. It has a deep hatred of America and our friends. And it has aided, trained, and harbored terrorists, including operatives of Al-Qaeda.
Before we attacked Iraq, it was a secular nation. There was no terrorism, no sponsoring of terrorism. Now, our own government, our own CIA, says it's the greatest breeding ground for terrorists in the world. So see, they're projecting what they're going to do. They're projecting what they're going to do. This is the double speak. This is how it works.
Danger is clear. Using chemical, biological, or one-day nuclear weapons obtained with the help of Iraq, the terrorists could fulfill their stated ambitions and kill thousands or hundreds of thousands of innocent people in our country or any other. The United States and other nations did nothing to deserve or invite this threat, but we will do everything to defeat it. Instead of drifting along toward tragedy, we will set a course toward safety. Before the day of horror can come, before it is too late to act, this danger will be removed. The United States of America has the sovereign authority to use force in assuring its own national security. That duty falls to me as Commander-in-Chief. By the oath I have sworn, by the oath I will keep. Recognizing the threat to our country, the United States Congress voted overwhelmingly last year to support the use of force against Iraq. America tried to work with the United Nations to address this threat because we wanted to resolve the issue peacefully. We believe in the mission of the United Nations. One reason the UN was founded after the Second World War was to confront aggressive dictators actively and early, before they can attack the innocent and destroy the peace. In the case of Iraq, the Security Council did act in the early 1990s. Under resolutions 678 and 687, both still in effect, the United States and our allies are authorized to use force in ridding Iraq of weapons of mass destruction. This is not a question of authority. It is a question of will. Last September, I went to the UN General Assembly and urged the nations of the world to unite and bring an end to this danger. On November 8th, the Security Council unanimously passed Resolution 1441, finding Iraq in material breach of its obligations and vowing serious consequences if Iraq did not fully and immediately disarm. Today, no nation can possibly claim that Iraq has disarmed, and it will not disarm so long as Saddam Hussein holds power. For the last 4.5 months, the United States and our allies have worked within the Security Council to enforce that council's long-standing demands. Yet some permanent members of the Security Council have publicly announced that they will veto any resolution that compels the disarmament of Iraq. These governments share our assessment of the danger, but not our resolve to meet it. Many nations, however, do have the resolve and fortitude to act against this threat to peace, and a broad coalition is now gathering to enforce the just demands of the world. The United Nations Security Council has not lived up to its responsibilities, so we will rise to ours. In recent days, some governments in the Middle East have been doing their part. They have delivered public and private messages urging the dictator to leave Iraq so that disarmament can proceed peacefully. He has thus far refused. All the decades of deceit and cruelty have now reached an end. Saddam Hussein and his sons must leave Iraq within 48 hours. Their refusal to do so will result in military conflict, commenced at a time of our choosing.
Truth Seeker, I want to take you back in time. When Saddam's sons were killed, or at least reported to be killed, the media glorified it. They put the images of their dead body on the screen a lot. They talked about it a lot. I thought it was really disgusting at the time. Can you remember? Sick stuff. Let's move on.
For their own safety, all foreign nationals, including journalists and inspectors, should leave Iraq immediately. Many Iraqis can hear me tonight in a translated radio broadcast, and I have a message for them. If we must begin a military campaign, it will be directed against the lawless men who rule your country, and not against you. As our coalition takes away their power, we will deliver.
Just think about that for a second. Is there any radio station in the United States that Americans can tune into to hear Saddam Hussein give a speech to the United States? Yet this broadcast, I mean, just think about it. If Saddam Hussein was giving a speech that George W. Bush had 48 hours to step down or Iraq is invading, where would that be carried in the United States? It wouldn't be carried unless our own media wanted us to hear about it. All right, moving on.
The food and medicine you need. We will tear down the apparatus of terror, and we will help you to build a new Iraq that is prosperous and free. In a free Iraq, there will be no more wars of aggression against your neighbors.
Oh my goodness, Truth Seeker, a free Iraq. Iraq is a disaster now. It's nothing but a war zone.
No more poison factories. No more executions of dissidents. No more torture chambers and rape rooms. The tyrant will soon be gone. The day of your liberation is near. It is too late for Saddam Hussein to remain in power. It is not too late for the Iraqi military to act with honor and protect your country by permitting the peaceful entry of coalition forces to eliminate weapons of mass destruction. Our forces will give Iraqi military units clear instructions on actions they can take to avoid being attacked and destroyed. I urge every member of the Iraqi military and intelligence services, if war comes, do not fight for a dying regime that is not worth your own life. And all Iraqi military and civilian personnel should listen carefully to this warning. In any conflict.
Truth Seeker, I just want to clarify what he said. He essentially said fighting against the evil empire is not worth your life. And sadly, as a collective society, we're taking that advice. We're not fighting against the evil empire as we should. Not just Iraqis, we the American people. We're all slaves to this system too. This system pretends to be our friend, but it is surely not. It's just one that exploits us and lies to us all day, every day. Let's move on.
Your fate will depend on your actions. Do not destroy oil wells, a source of...
What? Do not destroy oil wells? I mean, where are the priorities at?
Wealth that belongs to the Iraqi people. Do not obey any command to use weapons of mass destruction against anyone, including the Iraqi people. War crimes will be prosecuted. War criminals will be punished. And it will be no defense to say, I was just following orders. Should Saddam Hussein choose confrontation, the American people can know that every measure has been taken to avoid war. And every measure will be taken to win it. Americans understand the cost of conflict because we have paid them in the past. War has no certainty, except the certainty of sacrifice. Yet the only way to reduce the harm and duration of war is to apply the full force and might of our military, and we are prepared to do so. If Saddam Hussein attempts to cling to power, he will remain a deadly foe until the end. In desperation, he and terrorist groups might try to conduct terrorist operations against the American people and our friends. These attacks are not inevitable. They are, however, possible. And this very fact underscores the reason we cannot live under the threat of blackmail. The terrorist threat to America and the world will be diminished the moment that Saddam Hussein is disarmed.
Bzzz. I mean, just looking back at this speech, how bad is it? And Truth Seeker, I'm telling you, from the day I heard this, I just knew it was ridiculous nonsense. There wasn't a problem in Iraq when he was talking about all this. And it just seems so crazy to me. I mean, already here we are with the son of a former president. George W. Bush came across as a schmuck, an asshole, an arrogant bastard. And, you know, and now here he is, President Jr., continuing the tradition of going to war with Iraq, just like his dad. It just seemed all too obvious, too easy to see through, just like something was apparently very wrong with 9/11. And I just thought, oh my God, what kind of country am I living in? Are you kidding me? Because I noticed that the thoughts and feelings I was having was not being shared with my common man, and I knew that was true where I was living at the time, Arizona. as well as where I was from, Washington. And those are said to be two very different places in terms of our country and culture, but it's not so. It's like everyone's on the collective page of ignorance and apathy and not paying attention. Yeah.
Our government is on heightened watch against these dangers. Just as we are preparing to ensure victory in Iraq, we are taking further actions to protect our homeland. In recent days, American authorities have expelled from the country certain individuals with ties to Iraqi intelligence services. Among other measures, I have directed additional security at our airports and increased Coast Guard patrols of major seaports. The Department of Homeland Security is working closely with the nation's governors to increase armed security at critical facilities across America. Should enemies strike our country, they would be attempting to shift our attention with panic and weaken our morale with fear. And this,
Dear Lord, who is doing that to us? Huh! Isn't it just sick? I mean, how don't people see through it? Did you just hear what he said? Let's listen to it one more time. I can't believe it.
the Department of Homeland Security is working closely with the nation's governors to increase armed security at critical facilities across America. Should enemies strike our country, they would be attempting to shift our attention with panic and weaken our morale with fear. In this, they would fail. No act of theirs can alter the course or shake the resolve of this country. We are a peaceful people, yet we're not.
Isn't it unbelievable, Truth Seeker? It takes something to go up there and say this kind of stuff into a camera when you know it's not true.
A fragile people, and we will not be intimidated by thugs and killers. If our enemies dare to strike us,
That's because there are no bigger thugs and killers. Of course.
they and all who have aided them will face fearful consequences. We are now acting because the risks of inaction would be far greater. In 1 year or 5 years, the power of Iraq to inflict harm on all free nations would be multiplied many times over. With these capabilities, Saddam Hussein and his terrorist allies could choose the moment of deadly conflict when they are strongest. We choose to meet that threat now, where it arises, before it can appear suddenly in our skies and cities. The cause of peace requires all free nations to recognize new and undeniable realities. In the 20th century, some chose to appease murderous dictators whose threats were allowed to grow into genocide and global war. In this century, when evil men plot chemical, biological, and nuclear terror, a policy of appeasement could bring destruction of a kind never before seen on this earth. Terrorists and terrorist states do not reveal these threats with fair notice in formal declarations. And responding to such enemies only after they have struck first is not self-defense, it is suicide. The security of the world requires disarming Saddam Hussein now.
Did you just hear what he said, Truth Seeker? He just said that if we don't attack Iraq based on the threat that they could attack us, that is suicide. I mean, that is just insanity. To me, it was like nobody was listening or thinking, which very well might have been true. But how can it be? I mean, there's at the time there were said to be almost 300 million of us? It just doesn't make sense.
As we enforce the just demands of the world, we will also honor the deepest commitments of our country. Unlike Saddam Hussein, we believe the Iraqi people are deserving and capable of human liberty. And when the dictator has departed, they can set an example to all the Middle East of a vital and peaceful and self-governing nation. The United States, with other countries, will work to advance liberty and peace in that region. Our goal will not be achieved overnight, but it can come over time. The power and appeal of human liberty is felt in every life and every land. And the greatest power of freedom is to overcome hatred and violence and turn the creative gifts of men and women to the pursuits of peace. That is the future we choose. Free nations have a duty to defend our people by uniting against the violent. And tonight, as we have done before, America and our allies accept that responsibility. Good night, and may God continue to bless America.
When these people say God bless America, I'm quite certain they're talking about a different God than the common person does. True Seeker, the other big piece of propaganda from that time was the Colin Powell speech to the United Nations. And notice in the George W. Bush speech, he just referenced the United Nations a lot. Let's listen to Colin Powell, the meat of his UN Security Council testimony with regards to the dangers of Iraq.
One of the most worrisome things that emerges from the thick intelligence file we have on Iraq's biological weapons is the existence of mobile production facilities used to make biological agents. Let me take you inside that intelligence file and share with you what we know from eyewitness accounts. We have first-hand descriptions of biological weapons factories on wheels and on rails. The trucks and train cars are easily moved and are designed to evade detection by inspectors. In a matter of months, they can produce a quantity of biological poison equal to the entire amount that Iraq claimed to have produced in the years prior to the Gulf War. Although Iraq's mobile production program began in the mid-1990s, UN inspectors at the time only had vague hints of such programs. Confirmation came later, in the year 2000. The source was an eyewitness, an Iraqi chemical engineer who supervised one of these facilities. He actually was present during biological agent production runs. He was also at the site when an accident occurred in 1998. 12 technicians died from exposure to biological agents.
So that was just a little bit of the speech. He spoke for, I think, about 20 minutes, maybe longer. Anyway, let's look at the dates and what's curious about both of them for these two speeches. So again, George W. Bush, what we just watched, that was given March 18th, 2003, the 77th day of the year. Again, the American meridian is the 77th meridian. It cuts through Washington, D.C., where he gave the speech. The Pentagon there is 77 feet tall. Flight 77 hit it on September 11th. Knights of Templar are the original Freemasons. That phrase has a Pythagorean gematria of 77. The Freemason Lodge in Washington, D.C. has 33 pillars outside, each of which is 33 feet tall. It should be noted that George W. Bush is a member of Yale's Skull and Bones. Him and John Kerry both admitted to being members, the two people running for president 2004. Think about that. Our two main candidates for president were both from the same small secret society. You see just how rigged the game is. They're trying to show us. And I mean, even think about it. The son of the 41st president is the 43rd president. So we got father, Bill Clinton, son. Now we might get Barack Obama, other son. You know? Maybe Jeb Bush will be the next president. Could you believe it? Oh, man. So, that was what's the curiosity for that date. Colin Powell gave his testimony on February 5th. That's the 36th day of the year. 3-6. If you add up all the numbers up to 36, it sums to 666. And think of 3-6. There's a hip-hop group called 3-6 Mafia. Think of 3 6s, 666, 3-6. And there's some connections between these dates and numbers. It was March 22nd, 322. like Skull and Bones, that Operation Shock and Awe began, that has a simple English gematria that matches the gates of hell are open, which has a Jewish gematria of 666. And I truly think there's something very satanic about all this lying and making of war. Potentially the sacrifice element. You know, I'm not sure how all their sick deeds tie together, but it's apparent that something along these lines is going on. So that was at the United Nations. George W. Bush talked a lot about the United Nations in his speech. The United Nations is one of the Gang of 33's greatest achievements. It was thought up by Cordell Hall, a man with a 33 name, Cordell. He attended Cumberland, 39 gematria. The United Nations in New York City is 39 floors tall. New York with Pythagorean gematria sums to 39. The abbreviation NY equals 39. Its establishment date has a numerology of 39. Its charter date even has a numerology of 33, and their symbol, if you count each of the spaces, sums to 33. There's so many 33 and numerology tributes within the United Nations, this familiar number. The first president to travel abroad was Woodrow Wilson, who was also the first president to have a life number of 33. More recently, NBC's chief UN correspondent Ned Colt died within this window of time that many foreign correspondent reporters died, just following the Brian Williams scandal, somebody who's on the Council of Foreign Relations, the CFR. Months ago, we were introduced to the UN system coordinator for Ebola. His name is David Nabarro. More 33 numerology. And Nabarro, of course, almost every detail in the Ebola story has 33 coded into it. The Ebola story follows AIDS outbreak by 33 years. All the AIDS details were 33. AIDS, the acronym itself, sums to 33 with simple English gematria. 1 plus 9 plus 4 plus 19. This summer, we had the Michael Brown, Darren Wilson shooting hoax of August 9th. Turned out everybody in the story had a 33 name, including the mother, Leslie McSpadden, who became the first mother to be able to take the injustice of her son's death to the United Nations. Why? All because part of it being a big hoax. It's more about provoking people than anything else. Here's just some other reporting from earlier this year. This is September 2014. We're reporting on tuberculosis. Today there are 33 countries and territories where there are fewer than 100 TB cases per million population. You know, they just got to get their numbers in there. Obama also spoke at the United Nations earlier this year on September 24th. Notice that 9 plus 24 is 33. Plus 14 for the year is 47, just like the gematria of the word president. The word Caesar with simple English gematria equals 47. None of this stuff is by coincidence, Truth Seeker. It's how it's all done. It's a big puppet show, and these people follow the numbers. Here in North and South America, there's something called the Community of Latin American Caribbean States. It's made up of 33 countries, states, and islands. Woodrow Wilson, first president to go abroad. Here's his life number, 33. Take it a step further, 12 plus 28 plus 56 equals 96, like Freemason, like Satanism, like knowledge. Woodrow Wilson, very much connected to the founding of the United Nations. This is how the Gang of 33 works. And, of course, there's also the Arab League, established March 22nd, 1945, at the conclusion of World War II. Iraq, one of those members. Remember, Operation Shock and Awe started on 322. This is a number that has much importance to the United Nations as well. Or, excuse me, the United States. And that pretty much concludes the points I wanted to make, Truth Seeker. To sum it up, we're being led into another war based on complete propaganda. These ISIS beheadings, people burning in cages. It's just that, propaganda. Meant to provoke our emotions and get us to support yet another unnecessary war, at least enough consciously that we tolerate it and we move on with our lives like the conveyor belt we're on. Go to work, go to school, have a family, pay taxes. Keep this system of lies and deceit continuing while we wonder why we become more and more detached from our own lives and the people around us. I see the same things happening to everybody. And what surprises me is that more of us aren't willing to, put the brakes on, take a step back, say, okay, what do I need to do to fix this? Why is there all this unnecessary strife in my life? The answers are apparent when you take a step back and look. And we're not going to get the solutions to these problems until we're willing to confront them. All right, Truth Seeker, now I'm just ranting. Until next time.